Today we're in for a treat. We're talking about, Dior buying bags for $57 and selling them for $2,800. There's so much to talk about. Initially, I actually wasn't going to talk about this topic because I felt like so many people have covered it already, and I felt like I half covered it. But so many people hounded me on Twitter and Instagram, especially, saying, you need to cover this. Your next live stream needs to be on this topic. So I was like, okay, I'm a man of the people. Kind of to bring people up to speed, if you're not familiar with what has been going on, I recently did a live stream that was basically about how a lot of brands, including Armani and Dior, has been exploiting workers. So a big report came out. I was reading it on the Business of Fashion, and essentially what this report was saying was that a lot of the factories that luxury brands like Dior and Armani use are actually under investigation for exploitation. Some of them are using like slave labor in the sense that they're using illegal immigrants and paying them less than minimum wage because they're kind of undocumented workers. Then, of course, reports came out later that actually these brands aren't culpable for what has been going on, and who is actually being prosecuted is the factories themselves, because the brands have kind of legally separated themselves from the factories as entities because they use them as like third party producers. So they're not liable for any of that. So I kind of did a whole live stream on that. Shortly after, another report came out as part of this investigation in these brands and kind of what goes on behind the scenes. Then a report came out that Dior were producing bags for $57 and then selling them for $2,800. And that is essentially kind of like the big news that everyone has been talking about. I'm honestly really happy because on Patreon, now on YouTube channel memberships, on my channel too, all I've been talking about for damn near the past year is the fact that we're seeing like a death of luxury fashion. It's kind of not worth it. And I think what really annoys me the most about luxury fashion these days is not really the price, or not that they're hiking prices, because I think with luxury clothing, luxury goods in general, there's a sense that, part of what you're paying for is the name. So you kind of have an understanding that part of what you're paying for is the name. But what really pisses me off is they are hiking prices while simultaneously the quality is going down, while simultaneously they're exploiting more workers, while simultaneously they've gone from, using well-regulated factories and paying people livable wages to not doing that. And so that's what really annoys me about it. It's almost like every single thing that they market as luxury has kind of fizzled out over time. It's like, oh, we use these amazing factories, savoir faire. No, you don't. You outsource factories that are third-party factories that are exploiting workers. And then when you get investigated for it, you're like, oh, well, that's a third-party vendor. We couldn't be sure of how things were being produced. Or, the craftsmanship. If you guys see craftsmanship of, luxury goods these days versus years ago, you'd see that there's a massive difference. What else are they? Quality. We both know the quality. All of us basically know the quality is going down. I did a recent video on Chanel flat bags. When the CEO said that the prices are going up because there's an increase in craftsmanship, which is absolutely hilarious, knowing fully well that, they used to plate the hardware with 24 karat gold, and now it's like barely brass. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. Even, I just think they're marketing, and this is something I've said on Patreon in videos, that they're marketing sort of past realities of the brand. So they're marketing the fact that brands did certain things in the past that they don't do now. And for some reason, like, a lot of consumers don't really understand that. Because every time I make a video critiquing luxury brands, there's always that one person that's like, yeah, but you don't know, they use these specialized machines to make those bags. I'm like, specialized machines? Dana Thomas wrote a book in 2007 that clearly, she had so much proof in that book, How Luxury Lost Its Luster, where she literally interviews people that work in these factories, and they say how it's like an assembly line, and they very clearly describe, and the people on Patreon will know this, very clearly describe how these things are being made. And that was in 2007. And in 2024, they're cutting even more corners. So it's only going to get worse. So it's quite funny when people come to the defense of brands. I think also maybe sometimes people forget that I actually worked in the industry in so many different capacities. So I do know how things are produced. Like I have a very strong sense of how things are produced. And also, if we talk about, the price of how much it costs to produce a lot of these things, I say this all the time, I'll say it again, that when you're a massive brand like Dior, when you're a brand that's under a massive conglomerate like LVMH, with all the power that LVMH has, you have economies of scale. And what that means is that me being an irrelevant singular person, if I wanted to start a brand and I went to some random factory and I was like, how much does it cost to make a basic t-shirt? Because I'm only ordering 100 and they don't know who I am and they don't believe in me, they might tell me it's £100 each to create a t-shirt. Now, if you're Dior, because of the numbers you're going to produce, because it's such a big client and factories want to work with Dior, it helps their portfolio, blah, blah, blah. Dior can literally negotiate. So what I'm paying £100 to produce, Dior can literally pay 20 because of economies of scale and what the factory is getting out of it, and the fact that they want to keep Dior and LVMH as a client, because they know if Dior comes in and we have a good relationship with Dior, other brands under the LVMH stable might come and start using our factory. So that like there's even more of a reason why their profit margins are insane, because they have economies of scale. And some of these brands, they're vertically integrated. So with some of these brands, they own their own factories. Like Louis Vuitton is a big example of this. They own their own factories. They own the whole production process from top to bottom, which makes it cheaper when you own every stage of the process. So yeah, I've never really understood why people just blindly protect these brands and act like all this stuff is really expensive to make. Like it isn't. This is not Bottega using insane techniques to create things, or a couture collection. It's like a bag, a leather bag that they have a standardized pattern for, and they can just like reproduce it in like an assembly line sense. Let me see what people are saying. Alonso says, you're right, there's nothing special about it. The whole ethos is to create status and sell a personality for an illiterate sector of privileged people. I totally agree. I might only buy Comme des Garçons and Yamamoto. I'm good. I mean, some of Yoji's stuff had quality issues, but I haven't seen a lot of the new season stuff. But there was a time when it had quality issues. But the good thing about Yoji is that Yoji makes silhouettes that like you can't find in many other brands. Whereas like Dior doesn't do that, or Louis Vuitton doesn't do that. That's so Louis Vuitton stuff is less special, or Dior stuff is less special, because there's nothing that unique about Dior clothing that goes on the runway, or Louis Vuitton clothing that goes on the runway. Increase in craftsmanship, still the same process to make the bag. Exactly fact. And exactly what Leo is saying here. You're paying more for advertising and marketing expenses than production. 100%. People who buy today's luxury fashion seem like people with no style. I wouldn't say that. I just think that it's not worth it. But at the end of the day, if you want to buy that, buy that. There's a lot of things that I buy that aren't worth it. I buy fragrances that are way overpriced, and I know they're overpriced, but I just buy them because I love fragrances. So I wouldn't necessarily shame someone for buying into luxury fashion, but I think that the blind defending of luxury brands is what I don't agree with. Is this whole thing of, but luxury brands are using these specialized things, and what do you know about luxury? It's crafted perfectly, and it's like, I literally worked for a company that was one of the biggest fabric suppliers in the whole of Europe. I know how the industry works. Like, I know how it works. I don't know why you're blindly defending these brands. But what we can do quickly is read one of the articles, like from the New York Post, that kind of just talks about what was going on and kind of what happened. So it says, Dior Armani's pricey handbags made by migrant workers who make $2 an hour costs $57 to make. So it says, luxury goods makers behind iconic brands including Dior and Armani hired contractors that pay workers as little as $2 an hour to make handbags that they then sell for thousands of dollars a piece, according to European law enforcement officials. Dior, the French multinational luxury fashion house, chaired by mogul Bernard Arnault and his family, charges a supplier around $57 to manufacture a handbag that it sells in stores for around 2,780, according to the Wall Street Journal. This is also something that we've covered on Patreon, and we've talked about this with, what Dana Thomas said and how luxury lost its luster. So in the book, there's a chapter where Dana Thomas talks about how brands are in this constant search of improving profits. So she takes it from a journey of how, clothing was produced, where it was produced, what kind of factories. She interviews a lot of the factory makers that used to produce a lot of these clothes, and them basically complaining that luxury brands don't appreciate their craftsmanship anymore because they're only looking to increase their profit margins. So they've all outsourced now to, factories in China, and they're outsourcing to factories in the same country that have very dicey regulations on things. And then later on in the chapter, Dana Thomas predicts that in the future, and remember, this book was published in 2007, so obviously she was right. It was the right prediction to make because in 2024, this is happening now. But a lot of stuff was made in places like in China. A lot of stuff was made in Hong Kong before, but Hong Kong even got too expensive, so they started making more of that stuff to China. A lot of the fashion businessmen in Hong Kong actually became businessmen in China. And then stuff got too expensive for these brands to produce in China, so they started seeking even lower labor markets, like lower cost labor markets. So that's how you see these brands producing in places like Cambodia, places like Vietnam. That was actually to improve profit margins because China started to become too expensive, or Chinese labor started to become too expensive, and they couldn't exploit it as much as they wanted to. So they had to go into labor markets where obviously the labor is cheaper, but also they can, fiddle with the laws a bit more, and there's more gray area with the legality of the whole thing. So that's why, once again, even though it might be $57 to make, to assemble, I don't think the fabrics are far off, to be honest. And all that stuff, like I've said, you can watch my fashion book club episodes on Patreon. If you don't want to subscribe to my Patreon, because this is not a channel I'm like, oh my god, you have to subscribe to my Patreon, like, just buy the book. I would definitely suggest buy How Luxury Lost Its Luster by Dana Thomas. It's one of the most relevant books when it comes to luxury fashion, even though it was published in 2007. All her predictions were right if you look at what's going on right now. And stories like this wouldn't surprise you if you've read that book, and also if you've kind of listened to things that I've said in terms of like my experience working in the industry, things I've seen, and all those kind of things. AZ says, now we all understand why Kanye was screaming about the importance of manufacturing. Once you have the means of production on lock, you can basically write your own ticket. That's facts. Fashion industry moves like the illegal drugs industry. Wouldn't surprise me if a lot of brands have a monopoly on certain factories, which then limits a startup's ability to make things and beat them. Oh, so it's funny you actually brought this up. So from my experience in the industry, yes, there are some brands that have monopolies on certain things. Oh my God, let me tell you certain things that happens in the industry now that we're talking about like what happens behind the scenes and stuff. So it's very hard to like copyright or trademark fashion, right? Because it's very much like, how do you trademark that? How do you copyright that? Who owns what? How do you determine that this style of trouser is like identifiably yours because so many people would have made something that looks similar? So it's almost impossible to trademark things unless it's like a logo, which is very easy to trademark, like, or a signifier of your brand, like 3 stripes for Adidas, a Nike tick, those kind of things. But even though legally you can't trademark a lot of things, what a lot of these massive brands do is they will have a certain design or a certain type of fabric or a certain style of fabric, or even sometimes even certain colors, where they make it known to a lot of big factories that no one else is allowed to produce this factory. And if you let any other brand produce anything remotely similar with your factory, we will like blacklist your factory and we'll never work with your factory. And we'll make sure that every other brand related to, our company doesn't work with your factory, and we'll also make sure that other related brands don't work with your factory. So that's kind of the way that they regulate these things, even though there's no like legality to it. They just kind of use their power and just like bully the whole industry in not making things that are similar. So that's like one insane thing that happens behind the scenes, and you're like, I'm just trying to make a red jacket, and they're like, no. They're just like, nope. It's like, nah. Making a profit is not enough in business now. It's considered a failure to not grow more than you did the year before, which is psychotic. It's 100% psychotic. It's what I find really disgusting about the whole luxury fashion industry. It's this: we have to have year-on-year growth, quarter-on-quarter growth, all that sort of stuff. It's just so just the greed is just way too much. Yeah, the greed is just way too much. And I guess it comes down to the intentions of the brands, right? And I talked about this in my video. I think it was titled "Why Luxury is a Waste of Money" or something like that. And basically the main point I was making in that video, and I did reference how luxury lost its luster, is this point of how luxury fashion has changed. So you have couturiers who their main motivation was to be the best couturier, like the Christian Dior's and Christopher Balenciagas and the Coco Chanel's, the Elsa Schiaparelli's. They all made things that were quite unique and quite original for the time. Christian Dior less so, because what Christian Dior did, like with the new look, Christopher Balenciaga had kind of already done that. I've like done so much research on Balenciaga's work. Like he's done that new look style before the 1940s. However, they were all about craft, and their customers were upper society, like royals and like serious upper class, like lords and all that sort of stuff, who were expecting a certain level of quality. And so that was their customer base. And a lot of these couturiers they had a lot of money, but they weren't super rich. Like they weren't as rich as you would think they were, because they weren't business savvy, most of them, apart from maybe Coco Chanel. So a lot of them just used to sell ultra expensive clothing to really, really rich patrons, and that was about it. Then over time, when the businessmen started to get involved, they started to license the rights to produce a lot of these things in different countries. Like a good example is when Diana Vreeland was at Harper's Bazaar, she loved Chanel. She was a Chanel stan. And so what Diana Vreeland would do is she would write about ways to style Chanel in Harper's Bazaar. And because a lot of people in New York didn't really have access to a lot of the Chanel pieces, Chanel actually realized that, it would be really good if I could license out my name to different people in New York, where I could kind of show them how to make these clothes, and then people have access to it in New York. And then other brands started doing the same thing. You had Dior doing it, so many couturiers were doing it, and then that was kind of the start of stuff being watered down, because now you have clothing that isn't directly going through the atelier of these couturiers. And then we started to get big business moguls. That's when you start to get the Bernard Arnaults, who then turns it into just a profit-making business. And Bernard Arnault wasn't even concerned really about the craft or anything. He was just more interested in how these couturiers were able to convince people to buy things that are so expensive because of a craft and a history of craft and a history of design skill and all those things. And he was thinking about how he could package all of that understanding of what these brands stand for to make t-shirts and to make hoodies and to make sneakers and to do all those things, and just to make crazy profits. So that was kind of how fashion transitioned away from it just being about design and craft and all those kind of things, to it just being about how are we going to make the maximum money physically possible. Ewan says, in Dana Thomas's other book about McQueen and Galliano, that's Gods and Kings. Arnault's son was quoted saying, if they want to be creative, they can go be artists. I remember that, because if you want to be a fashion designer, this is about big business. If you want to be creative, go and be an artist. But anyway, let's continue. I feel like I went on a tangent. Let's continue reading the article. It says, Armani, the Milan-based designer, paid $270 to a supplier to make handbags that were then sold on the retail market for just under $2,000, according to the journal. It's quite funny because, once again, talking about fabric, like the fabrics used to make these like Christian Dior like tote bags, they're not that crazy. It's not leather. It's like a canvas. It's like some sort of like cotton canvas type fabric. It's not even anything that's special or anything that's super expensive either. So yeah, even that argument that people are making that, the fabrics are so expensive, that's why it costs so much, because I have to convince myself that I spent $2,000 and it's totally worth it. So anything you say is not valid. Um, it's quite funny, to be fair. Let's see what else is said. Italian authorities obtained the figures after police conducted a series of raids on workshops and makeshift factories that employed illegal immigrants and others off the book, the journal reported. Prosecutors in Milan accused the companies of hiring subcontractors that employ Chinese migrants and other foreign workers who are paid as little as between $2 and $3 an hour. The workers often sleep in the workshops and are made to work from dusk until dawn, including on holidays and weekends, it was alleged. Last month, Italian judges ordered a subsidiary of Dior, Armani, and Alvaro Martina Spa, another luxury fashion maker known for matte print bags and other items, to be placed under court administration after ruling that their manufacturing units mistreated migrant workers. This is so funny. They always do this thing where it's like the Post has sought to comment like they're ever going to comment about these things. I don't know why they do that. I think it just adds a pizzazz to the article where it's like, we asked them for a comment and there was no comment, so they're guilty because they don't want to say anything. I think that's why they kind of ask for comments, knowing fully well that a brand's not going to be like, let's tell you about how we exploit migrant workers. Let's have an amazing interview about that. I can never look at that bag the same. It's so cheap looking to me now. I know people who literally make fun of me when I explain to them that their luxury clothes are actually cheap to produce. Yeah, I've explained this before. I think what it is that a lot of people don't actually know a lot of these things because, unfortunately, a lot of conversations that people have around fashion are really surface level on most of the internet, on most corners of the internet, in most of the world. So people also don't really know what goes on in fashion. Obviously, in my case, I'm like a fashion journalist. I studied fashion at fashion school. I've worked in the industry. So I guess I have a very strong insight of what goes on behind the scenes, but most people don't. So most consumers genuinely, because of how it's marketed, they genuinely think that they're buying something that's like expertly crafted and all this sort of stuff. So you kind of burst their bubble when you tell them that it's cheap to produce and actually like you're just paying for the name. Um, and so they have to validate in their head why they've spent so much money on that clothing. And so because they kind of force themselves into doing that, that's why they'll always disagree with you, because they don't want to feel stupid or they don't want to feel like they've been scammed or they've been cheated out of their money. So that's why they're always going to fight you when you're like, yeah, your stuff is like cheaply made. They're not going to like that. Um, they're not going to like that at all. Question is, who can afford these overpriced products? Luxury brands make more than fast fashion, it seems. Yeah, so there's definitely people that can afford it. The market is definitely there. I mean, geez, like I've working in fashion, it almost makes you like pissed off, especially if you're not from a rich background, because it's almost disgusting how exploitative the industry is, and then you go to an event where they spend 1 million on some like pointless, useless event that the brand has thrown, where not even that many people go to the event, and it's like unlimited bar. Like almost every fashion event is like unlimited bar and like not like really expensive drinks. Um, and then you can't even pay workers a livable wage, but you can be out here doing unlimited retops of Moe. Like it's just a bit crazy to me. It's just a bit mad. What about all of the unsold luxury goods? So there was a scandal that came out. Let me see if I can show you guys on the screen since we've got Google. Um since you got Google up. So yeah, there was this thing here where this was in 2018. This was an article that came out in 2018 where there was evidence of Burberry burning bags and clothes and destroying perfume that was worth millions. And the reason is because obviously they want to protect their brand image. So yeah, there was all this stuff like okay, so the total value of goods Burberry destroyed over the past 5 years, so that was from 2013 to 2018, was worth 90 million pounds, which is insane. And they destroyed 28.6 million pounds worth of product in 2017 to protect its brand. So that's exactly what happens to the unsold goods of these luxury brands. They just destroy it. And even though Burberry said, "Oh, we're not going to destroy it anymore. We're going to use it." That's all bullshit. I don't trust any of these brands. I've worked in the industry for too long, and I have too much evidence of different things to not believe anything they say. So I do definitely believe that most brands still destroy most of their stuff. To be honest, they're just more careful with how they do it, so that articles like this don't come out where they're being exposed for this sort of stuff. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.